My 7-year-old son once whispered something that changed my life forever. He said, "Mom, Dad has a girlfriend, and when you go on your trip, he is going to take all your money." Those words froze me more than any alarm ever could. My name is Anna Ballantyne. I was 38 then, living in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. From the outside, everything about my life looked calm and successful. I was a senior financial consultant for a firm that worked with international clients. My husband, Charles Ballantyne, was charming and confident, known for his easy smile. Our son Ben was the light of my world, curious, kind, and wise beyond his years. That night, I was in my bedroom packing for a 2-day business trip to New York. My laptop glowed on the desk while the sound of Ben's small puzzle pieces clicked in the next room. He had been quieter than usual lately. I assumed he was sad about me leaving. When I finished folding a white blouse, I called out, "Remember, honey, you will be with Daddy for 2 nights, okay?" There was no answer, just the faint sound of him shifting on the carpet. Later, when I tucked him in, Ben did not let go of me. He lay there, his little head resting on my chest, silent for a long time. The air was soft, peaceful. Then he said it. "Mom," he whispered. "Daddy has a girlfriend." At first I laughed a little, thinking it was a misunderstanding. Then his next words hit harder. He told her that when you go on your trip, they will go to the bank. He said they will do something with the money. I felt my breath catch. "What did you hear exactly?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Ben said he was told they would have 3 days to get everything done. He yawned as if unaware that he had just shattered something inside me. After he fell asleep, I sat by his bed, frozen. My mind raced between disbelief and fear. Was it possible that Charles, my husband and partner, was planning something behind my back? I tried to reason with myself, but the tone in my son's voice still echoed in my head. A warning so pure and innocent it could not be ignored. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock. The truth did not arrive in anger or thunder. It arrived in a whisper from a child who did not know the weight of what he was saying. By 3 in the morning I was still awake. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The steam had long vanished, but my thoughts were boiling over. The words of my son replayed again and again in my head. Something inside me refused to dismiss them as a child's imagination. I opened my laptop and started searching through old emails. Weeks earlier, Charles had asked me to sign some documents while I was recovering from surgery. He brought them to my bedside, kissed my forehead and said, "It is just an update to our insurance, baby. Nothing serious." I had been weak and groggy, barely able to hold a pen. I trusted him completely. Scrolling through the files, I found the one that changed everything. The title read, "General Power of Attorney, Full Authority." My stomach dropped. I opened it, and the legal text confirmed my worst fear. I had unknowingly given Charles full control over my assets. He could sign documents, sell property, and move money on my behalf. All it would take was his signature and a single claim that I was unavailable. The more I read, the sicker I felt. How could I have been so careless? It was not carelessness. It was trust, and he had turned that trust into a weapon. By dawn, the city outside was waking up. Birds chirped. Cars started. People brewed coffee to face another normal day. My day had already split in two. The life I thought I had, and the one I was beginning to see. At 8 in the morning, I made a call to someone I had not spoken to in years. Cheryl Whitman, an old college friend turned attorney. When she answered, my voice shook. "Cheryl, I think my husband is trying to steal from me." She asked me to come in right away. Her office was in a small brick building downtown, warm but serious. I handed her the printed documents. She read them silently, line by line, before looking up. "Anna, this is not an insurance update. This is a full power of attorney. With this, he can do almost anything in your name. If he claims you are mentally unfit or unreachable, he can move assets, close accounts, even sell your house." I felt my heart pounding in my ears. "And he can do it without me here." "Yes," she said softly. "If you leave town, that is the perfect window." Cheryl leaned forward. "You need to act quietly. Do not confront him yet. First, we revoke this power of attorney immediately. Then you alert your bank and credit institutions to block any joint access. Third, start gathering evidence of intent. We will need proof." I nodded, though my hands were trembling. Fear was still there, but something else rose with it. Resolve. I was not going to be the victim of my own signature. If my husband was truly planning what I feared, I would expose him before he realized I knew. The next morning, the house looked perfectly ordinary. Sunlight on the curtains, the smell of coffee, the hum of the dishwasher. Beneath that calm, everything had changed. I watched Charles from across the kitchen island, studying every movement as if I were seeing him for the first time. He smiled when he saw me. "You look tired," he said casually. "I barely slept," I replied, forcing a small laugh. He poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one toward me. "When do you fly out again?" "Tuesday morning, right?" "Yes. Early flight." He nodded, stirring his cup with slow precision. "Are you coming back Thursday or Friday?" It was an innocent question that hid a clock behind it. I sipped my coffee and lied. "Friday evening." "Perfect," he said and smiled. That smile, soft and confident, felt rehearsed. It was the confirmation I did not need, but already knew. For the rest of the day, he acted like a perfect husband. He cooked dinner, laughed at Ben's stories, even offered to help me pack. Every kind gesture felt scripted, meant to keep me calm until I left. By late afternoon, I drove to Cheryl's office again. She had brought another attorney into the case. A calm, sharp-eyed man named Philip Grant who specialized in financial and domestic fraud. Philip read through the files while I tried to steady my breath. "Your husband is in a powerful position," he said at last. "With this document he could transfer your property, drain your accounts, and claim you are incapacitated. If he acts while you are away, it could take weeks to reverse." "Then we stop him now," I said. Philip nodded. "We will, but we will do it quietly. If he suspects anything, he will rush his plan. First, we draft and file a revocation of the power of attorney. Second, we notify your banks and credit institutions to flag and block any attempt in your name. Third, we monitor every move until he exposes himself. Let him think everything is normal." When I got home that evening, Charles was waiting in the living room. 2 glasses of wine were already poured. He smiled. "You seem tense. Is it work?" "Yes," I lied. "Just work." He touched my shoulder. "Relax, baby. Everything is going to be fine." The way he said it chilled me. It did not sound like comfort. It sounded like a promise from someone who believed he had already won. By Monday night, my decision was set. I would not fly anywhere. I would stay close, hidden but close. Cheryl and Philip arranged everything. I would pretend to leave for my trip while they watched the house and the bank. If he acted, we would have proof. That evening, I packed a suitcase with old clothes and papers, enough to make the act believable. When Charles saw it by the door, he smiled with satisfaction. "Are you all set?" "Yes," I said lightly. "I only need to check in for my flight." He nodded and took a slow sip like a man who had finished a rehearsal. At dawn Tuesday, I kissed Ben and told Charles the first would text from the airport. I drove out of the neighborhood with my suitcase and looped back to a quiet townhouse that Cheryl had rented in her firm's name. It was close to home yet felt like another world. Philip was already there with a laptop and a small kit of cables and forms. He had arranged access to the branch's public footage and set up a legal monitor on my home cameras. Every angle, every motion, every departure. "Once he believes you are gone, he will move fast," Philip said. "He will think this is his window. That is when we catch him." I nodded. Fear sat in my chest, but a steadier force sat with it. Resolve. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. "Hey, sweetheart. Did you board?" I did not answer. 30 minutes later. "Everything okay? Let me know when you land." He was checking to confirm I was not nearby. The driveway stayed empty for hours. Then at 9:15 the next morning, the feed lit up. Charles left in his gray suit with a black folder under his arm. His stride was confident, like a man certain the world belonged to him. Outside, a woman sat in a silver car. Cheryl had given me her name. Chloe Sanders. The mistress. The partner. Philip split the screen to the bank camera. We watched Charles step to the counter and present his documents. His voice was low and polished. "As the legal agent for Anna Ballantyne, I would like to access and liquidate the funds from her personal account." The clerk frowned and excused herself. A branch manager arrived with a careful smile. "Sir, this authorization was revoked yesterday. Your access as a cosigner has been removed." Charles blinked. "That is impossible. I hold full authority." The manager pressed a small button under the desk and kept her voice calm. I will need you to step aside. Security will assist you. Security began to approach. Outside the glass door, Chloe paced in small agitated circles. Charles stalked out to meet her. They said she revoked it, he hissed. She cannot. She was supposed to be gone. Philip ended the recording and sat back. That is it, he said. We have them. I stared at the screen. I did not feel triumph. Only a quiet, exhausted grief. The man I loved had exposed himself fully. Betrayal rarely arrives alone. It arrives with a witness and a plan. The hours after the bank incident felt endless. I sat in the safe house while the video replayed in my mind. Shock. Anger. Under it all a darker current. Fear. By noon my phone vibrated without stopping. Calls. Texts. Voicemails. Where are you? Why did you do this? We need to talk right now. I did not answer. Every message was another brick in a wall I needed to build. Philip typed notes at the small kitchen table. Let him talk himself into a hole, he said. Whatever you do, do not show emotion. You are winning by staying silent. It was not easy. Silence can be louder than any shout when you still remember the person on the other end. Near 6 in the evening, another call came from an unknown number. Philip nodded toward the phone. Answer it. We are recording. I took a breath and pressed the green button. Hello. Anna. Charles' voice was tight and strained. We need to talk. About what? You know what? His tone swung between anger and plea. What happened this morning was insane. You made a huge mistake. A mistake? You mean catching you trying to empty my accounts? He exhaled. You are exaggerating. I was managing our finances. For us. For us. Or for you and Chloe. A long silence. Then his voice hardened. She has nothing to do with this. I have recordings that say otherwise, I said. The bank has footage of you trying to pose as my agent. You should have worn a different suit. He gave a bitter laugh. You think you have one. This is not a game, I said. You wanted to control every decision and every dollar. Maybe I just wanted a life where I mattered. A life where you mattered. That life does not include stealing from your wife. You signed those papers, he said. You gave me power. I used it. You used my trust, I said. That is something you will never get back. In the doorway I saw movement. Ben had stepped into the kitchen like a shadow. Is that Dad? He whispered. I nodded and pulled him close. Is he going to take me away? No, baby, I whispered. He will not. On the line, Charles turned cold. Do not use him against me. I am protecting him, I said. From you. A heavy pause. Then he muttered. You will regret this. The call ended. Philip stopped the recording and let out a breath. That was gold. Direct admission of intent. Emotional manipulation. Coercion. We will take it to the district attorney. I looked at my son. He held my hand. I gave him the calmest smile I could while my heart pounded like a drum. For the first time I believed we might win. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. I walked through the entrance with Philip at my side and kept my chin level. I had barely slept, yet exhaustion had sharpened into focus. This was the day we would pull the curtain back. The clerk checked our names and waved us toward a small hearing room where the walls held framed state seals and the air was too quiet. Across the table sat Charles and Chloe. He wore a dark suit that did not hide the tremor in his hands. She kept sunglasses perched on her head and stared at a fixed point on the wall. Neither of them looked at me. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He was an older man with clear eyes that had listened to too many stories and learned which ones were lies. The case number was called. Counsel announced appearances. My heartbeat thudded once and then settled into a steady drum. Philip rose first. Your Honor, my client Mrs. Anna Ballantyne was deceived into signing a broad power of attorney during a medical recovery period. Her husband then used that document to plan the unauthorized transfer of assets and intended to relocate the child without consent. We have direct recordings, surveillance footage, and corroborating messages. The judge turned to Charles. Mr. Ballantyne, do you wish to be heard? Charles stood slowly. This is all a misunderstanding, Your Honor. My wife has been under stress. I was managing our finances responsibly. The bank staff reacted to a clerical error. I did not intend harm. His voice tried to sound reasonable. yet a brittle edge cut through the vowels. He glanced at me for the first time. I kept my gaze on the bench. Philip connected the laptop to the court monitor. With permission, Your Honor, we will play the recording. The speakers softened Charles' voice from the phone call. You will regret this. The words filled the room. Then the bank footage appeared. Charles at the counter, shoulders squared, tone formal. As the legal agent for Anna Ballantyne, I would like to access and liquidate. The manager arrived. Sir, this authorization was revoked yesterday. His face changed in a single beat from confidence to alarm. Outside the glass, Chloe paced with nervous steps. The judge leaned forward. Pause there. He studied the frame where Charles pressed his mouth into a hard line. Resume. The clip ended. Silence held for a count of 3. The judge looked at Charles again. You maintain that this was a clerical error. Charles lifted his chin. Yes, Your Honor. I was attempting to stabilize our accounts while my wife was away. She exaggerates. Cheryl stood beside Philip and addressed the bench. Your Honor, we have notarized revocation documents filed before the bank visit, certified notices to the institutions, and a timeline that places Mr. Ballantyne at the branch the morning after he confirmed Mrs. Ballantyne would be out of state. We also have phone records showing repeated messages from Mr. Ballantyne urging her to confirm departure. The judge shifted his gaze to Chloe. Miss Sanders, what was your purpose at the bank? She swallowed. I was waiting to give him a ride. The judge did not blink. Were you aware of his attempt to access funds that no longer belonged to him? She looked at the table. I did not know the details. Her voice had shrunk to a whisper. I stood when the judge invited me to speak. Your Honor, I said, I trusted my husband. He brought me papers when I could barely hold a pen. I signed them believing they were insurance updates. While I healed, he positioned himself to erase me. My son heard what he should never have heard. He warned me, and that warning saved us. I will not pretend I am not afraid. I am afraid of what would have happened if I had boarded that plane. The judge nodded and made notes. He spoke without heat, yet each word carried weight. The court finds that the plaintiff has met the burden of demonstrating an attempt to misuse a power of attorney that had been revoked, and an intent to interfere with custodial stability. Effective immediately, the court issues a temporary restraining order against Mr. Ballantyne and Ms. Sanders. All contested assets will be frozen pending further hearing. Temporary sole custody is awarded to Mrs. Ballantyne. Supervised visitation may be requested through proper channels. Charles' grip tightened on the back of his chair. Your Honor, please. I am his father. I provide. The judge lifted a hand. You will follow the order. If you violate it, you will be held in contempt. The gavel tapped once. Not loud. Final. Outside the hearing room, the hallway felt brighter. My knees softened for a second and then held. Philip touched my shoulder lightly. It is a strong order. Cheryl squeezed my hand and whispered, breathe. Across the hall, Chloe spoke in a rush to Charles. I told you this was dangerous. He pulled his arm from her grip and stared at me with an expression I had not seen before. There was fury in it, and there was also fear. We stepped into the sunlight. The courthouse steps were shallow and wide. Reporters were not there. This was not a spectacle to anyone but us. Yet I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. I breathed in slow and steady. The air tasted like rain that had not fallen yet. I held my phone and stared at the screen until the numbers stopped shaking. Then I called the school and told them I would pick Ben up myself. That evening we ate early. Simple food. Buttered noodles and a salad that wilted under a light dressing. Ben told a story about a science experiment that fizzed. His voice climbed and fell, and I let its music wash through me. When he ran to feed the dog, my phone buzzed again. A new number. I answered. A measured voice introduced himself as a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. He had reviewed the materials from our attorneys and wanted to confirm a few items for a potential referral. Philip joined by conference line and handled the questions with calm precision. I repeated facts, dates, times. The detective thanked us and ended the call with quiet professionalism. The house felt steadier when the line clicked off. Night gathered around the windows. After Ben fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank document. I wrote a single sentence. Today the court believed me. I let that sentence stand alone for a long time. Then I added another. Tomorrow I will believe me too. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms together. Gratitude rose like warmth from the base of my throat. Not victory. Not yet. Gratitude for the truth being seen. At midnight the doorbell rang. The sound cut the dark like a knife. The dog barked once and went silent at my command. I checked the camera feed. Charles stood on the porch with his head bowed and his hands hanging open. He looked smaller. He looked like someone who had run out of scripts. I did not open the door. I pressed the intercom button and kept my voice level. You are violating a court order. Leave now. He lifted his face toward the camera. Please. I need to talk to you. I need to talk to my son. My hands wanted to shake and did not. You will contact your lawyer. You will request supervised visitation. If you do not leave, I will call the police. He stared at the door for a long moment and then walked down the steps into the dark. I did not sleep. I lay beside Ben and listened to the steady rhythm of his breath. At dawn I brewed coffee that I did not drink and stood at the window while the sky paled. Resolve settled deeper into place. This was not only about money. It was about naming what harm looks like when it wears a kind smile and carries a folder. The next days moved like measured steps across a narrow bridge. Philip filed motions to convert the temporary orders to permanent ones. Cheryl drafted a civil complaint that laid out the fraud with clean lines and numbered paragraphs. The bank issued a formal letter confirming the attempted access had been blocked after revocation. The recording was transcribed. Every page gave me back a little dignity. On Friday afternoon the detective called again. There would be an interview the following week. He asked if I was safe. Yes, I said. I am safe. He paused and then said he would note the answer, yet to call if anything changed. After we hung up I stood very still and let the room come back into focus. Safety did not feel like a word. Felt like a practice. That evening Ben and I took a short walk. The sidewalk was cracked in places and the late light turned the leaves a gentle gold. He kicked a pebble and asked if the judge was going to make Dad tell the truth. I knelt so our eyes were level. The judge made a decision to keep us safe, I said. Truth takes time, but we are walking toward it. He nodded and slipped his hand into mine. Back home I tidied the house and set a clean stack of documents on the counter. I labeled a folder evidence and another one letters and a third one next. I did not know exactly what would fill the third. I only knew there would be a next, and I intended to meet it standing up. I looked at the photo on the fridge where Ben and I grinned with our hair blown wild by a spring wind. Then I turned off the kitchen light. In the quiet of that night I spoke a promise only to myself. I will protect my son. I will protect my name. I will protect the part of me that still believes in mornings. The morning after the order, the house felt like a guarded island. I brewed coffee and watched the street from behind the curtain. Each passing car sounded like a question. Philip called at 8 to confirm our next filings. Cheryl joined and walked me through the plan with a calm voice that steadied my hands. We would move to convert the temporary orders into permanent relief. We would seek attorney fees. We would continue to cooperate with the detective. Every step was clear, and yet my chest still held a storm. By noon a courier arrived with a thick envelope from the bank. The letter confirmed that Charles had attempted access with a revoked authority. It also attached a formal complaint that the branch manager had filed. I placed the pages into the evidence folder and felt a small click inside my ribs. That click was not joy. It was the sound of something that had been loose finally settling into place. I picked Ben up early and took him for ice cream. We sat in a corner booth and watched the afternoon self. He asked if we were still safe. I nodded and told him that safety was something we would practice together, day after day. He spooned a swirl into his mouth and made a face at the cold. I laughed and let the sound wash the room. That night the detective called. He had traced a pattern in the transactions that flowed from one of our joint accounts in the months before the surgery. Several transfers went to a shell company with a name I did not recognize. The detective said the registered agent was a contractor who often set up empty entities. The purpose was usually to hide movement or to prepare a pipeline for a later grab. The words were careful and dry, yet I felt heat rise along my neck. Philip asked the detective to send a subpoena list. I wrote the name of the shell company on a yellow note and stuck it to the fridge like a promise. 2 days later the turning point arrived without warning. It came on a Wednesday that looked harmless. The sky was bright. The yard smelled like cut grass. I had just finished a video call with Cheryl when the school rang. The secretary spoke quickly. A man had tried to pick Ben up during lunch. He said there had been a schedule change. The staff asked for identification and a court order. He produced neither. When they refused, he grew tense and left. The secretary thought it was Charles. The air left the room. I thanked her, grabbed my keys, and drove to the school with my heartbeat roaring in my ears. The principal met me at the front office. She had already notified security and logged the attempt. She ushered me into a small conference room and poured water into a paper cup. My hand shook as I sipped. The principal said the man had worn a baseball cap low over his face and kept the conversation short, which was not the behavior of a parent who forgot a form. It was the behavior of someone who did not want to be seen. I called Philip from the parking lot. His voice turned from measured to iron. He told me to head straight to the police station to make a report for violation of the order. The detective met us in a small room that smelled like copier toner. He listened, took notes, and asked for the security footage from the school. Within an hour we watched the grainy video together. Charles walked into the frame with a folder under one arm. He kept his head down, signed nothing, and left when confronted with the policy. The detective paused the frame where the profile of his face showed clearly. "That will be enough for a warrant to question him," he said. The fear that had held my body since the phone call changed shape. It became focus. It became something with a spine. I turned to the detective. "I want to add one more thing to your file." I opened the evidence folder and slid across printouts that tied the shell company to 2 payments made by Charles. The amounts were small. The dates lined up with my hospital stay. The detective traced the lines with a pencil and made quiet sounds that meant he was connecting dots. We drove home along a road lined with early blooming trees. Their pale flowers looked like quiet applause. Ben sat in the back seat and hummed a song he had learned in music class. I watched him in the mirror and felt both fragile and fierce. At home I folded laundry with frantic care and waited for the next call. It came near sunset. The detective said they had located Charles at a short-term rental on the edge of town. He had a visitor. The plates on the car belonged to Chloe. They would not move yet. They needed to observe. He asked if I felt safe for the night. I said yes and checked the locks again. The next morning the detective called at dawn. They had applied for a search warrant linked to the shell entity and the hard drives in the rental. He advised me to avoid social media, and to let all numbers I did not recognize go to voicemail. Then he said one more thing that made the room tilt. There is a chance he will try one more bold move before he understands he has no oxygen left. Keep your son close. Keep your phone on. I thanked him and held the phone against my chest for a moment after the line went dead. By noon a different call came. It was the principal again. She wanted to reassure me that the district had flagged our file at every level. Then she told me something unexpected. The parent volunteer who handled the front desk at lunch had recognized Chloe from a fitness studio and had already provided the detective with her full name and car model. An ordinary network had caught a thread that a formal system may have missed. I felt a swell of humble gratitude for the quiet watchfulness of women. The decisive moment arrived that evening. It was not loud at first. It was a shape that moved outside the dining room window while I set plates on the table. I checked the camera feed and saw a figure step onto the porch. The doorbell rang once. I told Ben to take the dog into his room and close the door. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button. "Charles, you are violating a protective order. Leave the property." His voice came through low and urgent. "I just need to see my son. Give me 5 minutes. I can stand on the porch. I will not come in. I will not cause trouble." I breathed once and kept my tone flat. "You will communicate through your attorney." He leaned closer to the camera. His eyes looked wild. "You think this is over. You think you have won. You have poisoned him against me." The siren began as a faint ripple at the edge of the street and grew into a clear line of sound. I had dialed while he spoke. Red and blue light washed the porch. He turned his head, startled. 2 officers stepped onto the walk. They spoke to him with professional distance, took his name and confirmed the order. Charles tried to explain. He gestured. He reached for the past as if it could cover the present. The officers asked him to put his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked. The sound was small and final. I did not step outside. I watched through the glass as they guided him to the car. His face moved through disbelief to anger, and then to something that looked like a boy lost at a fair. For a flicker of a second, sorrow touched the edge of my resolve. Then I remembered the call from the school. I remembered the bank footage. I remembered the whisper that had woken me from a warm life. The sorrow faded. The detective called 10 minutes later. He had been notified by the patrol unit. He said the warrant had been signed and the team was on the way to the rental. He asked if I wanted to be informed as they cataloged evidence. I said yes and stood at the sink with the phone tucked under my ear while I rinsed plates we had not used. He described the search with clean details. A laptop, 2 phones, a ledger with dates and initialed notes, a key with a storage unit number, a folder that carried the name of the shell company in small print at the bottom corner. Each item sounded like a rung on a ladder out of a dark place. Night settled deep. Ben slept. The dog sighed at the foot of the bed. I sat at the table with the evidence folder open and a pen in my hand. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum. My mind played the scene at the door again and again until it turned less sharp and more like a page in a book I had already read. The phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Cheryl. Proud of you. Rest if you can. Tomorrow we finish what began today. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. The turning point had not been a single crash. It had been a series of choices stacked into a wall that could hold. I thought of the judge and his steady voice. I thought of the principal and her careful notes. I thought of the volunteer who recognized a face. I thought of the detective who followed the thread. I thought of my son and the whisper that had started it all. I spoke into the quiet. We are safe tonight. We are moving toward daylight. Then I finally slept. Morning came like a clear bell. The patrol report was filed. The warrant was active. The house felt lighter, as if a window had opened somewhere I could not see. I brewed tea and watched a thin line of sun lift across the table. Ben patted in with sleep still soft on his face. He asked if everything was over. I told him the truth. Almost, I said. Today we turn the key. By 9 I was at the courthouse with Cheryl and Philip. The hallway smelled like old paper and stronger coffee. Reporters had gathered, drawn by the arrest and by whispers that the search at the rental had turned up more than anyone expected. Philip guided me past the cameras with a small tilt of his shoulder. Cheryl carried a slim binder that looked calm and dangerous at once. In the hearing room, the judge took the bench with grave patience. The detective sat near the front with 2 bankers and the branch manager who had pressed the silent button on the day that changed our path. Charles entered in a suit that still held the creases from the dry cleaner. Chloe followed with sunglasses and a flat mouth. He did not look at me. The prosecutor began with quiet force. He laid out the timeline like stones across a stream. A power of attorney obtained during a medical recovery. A pattern of small transfers to a shell entity. An attempted liquidation while the spouse was supposedly out of town. An attempted violation of a protective order at a school. An arrest for violating the order at the home. Then he nodded to the detective, who rose and summarized the search. 2 laptops. 2 phones. A ledger matching dates to amounts. A key that led to a storage unit where they found a desk safe. Inside the safe were copies of my signature from various documents and a draft affidavit that claimed I was mentally unfit to manage my affairs. The room shifted on its axis. The draft affidavit felt like a hand closing around my throat from months ago, when I had been weak and trusting and blind. Philip touched my elbow, a small anchor. The judge asked for the chain of custody and reviewed it with care. Then he turned to our table. Counsel, anything further? Cheryl stood. Yes, Your Honor. She moved like water that had found its course. She placed on the evidence cart a single page from the bank. It showed a call placed by Charles to the branch manager 3 days before my scheduled flight, asking about procedures for closing accounts on behalf of an unavailable spouse. She placed next a transcript from my recorded call, with the admission that he had used my signature to control funds and the chilling threat that I would regret my stance. She finished with the school report and the timestamp security video still. The judge leaned back. His voice, when it came, was less stern than it was tired. I find probable cause for the criminal counts and sufficient grounds to convert the temporary protective order into a permanent order. Custody remains with the mother. Supervised visitation may be considered in the future upon clear evidence of compliance. He paused and looked at Charles with a gaze that weighed more than words. Mr. Charles, you have walked yourself into a storm of your own making. Step back. Accept counsel. Comply with the order. This court has no interest in drama. It has interest in truth and in the safety of a child. A murmur moved through the room. Charles stared at the table. Chloe stared at the floor. I breathed out in a long ribbon and felt the ribbon float toward the ceiling and disappear. Outside the courthouse the air felt washed. Reporters called my name. I kept my eyes on the steps and did not stop. In the car Philip let out a breath I had not known he was holding. Cheryl smiled, brief and fierce. You did well, she said. You stayed steady. That matters more than anything. The weeks that followed were a slow healing mixed with small battles. The district attorney filed charges for attempted fraud and for violation of the order. The civil court kept the asset freeze in place and later awarded attorney fees. The detective returned the last items from the search that had belonged to me, including a copy of my signature that had been traced onto a transparent sheet. I sat at the kitchen table and slid that transparent sheet under a lamp. The outline of my name looked like a ghost that someone had tried to train. At night, when the house had gone quiet, I would sit with tea and read through the binder Cheryl had built. Each page held a clean line. A proof of something once felt only as dread. I realized that building a life after betrayal is an act of paperwork as much as it is an act of courage. You gather, you number, you sign, you file, and you keep going. Ben began to sleep deeper. He stopped asking whether the door was locked. He started asking if we could plant tomatoes in spring. We did. He watered them with careful hands and told them to be brave. The dog learned to nap in a square of sun by the bookshelf. I learned to cook 2 new dishes. I learned to sleep without waking at 3 with my heart sprinting across an empty field. Then an unexpected letter arrived from the state bar. An investigator had opened a file based on a referral that one of the notaries involved in the earlier documents had received a payment that looked like a bribe. I understood with a cold clarity that betrayal rarely travels alone. It is a caravan. It brings clerks who glance the other way, and friends who call at odd hours, and a notary who accepts cash for a signature they did not see. The investigator asked if I would answer questions. I said yes. Truth costs breath, but it buys peace. Spring tipped into early summer. The case moved along its deliberate track. On a bright morning, the prosecutor called to tell me a plea was on the table. The fraud count would stay. The violation of the order would stay. The attempted interference at the school would count as an aggravating factor. If Charles accepted, he would avoid trial but face probation under close conditions and a suspended sentence that would trigger if he tried again. There would be restitution for legal costs. There would be mandatory counseling. There would be no contact outside supervised channels. I looked out the window at tomatoes that had set small green fruit and thought about consequence. I said I would accept if the order remained strong, and if the counseling included a program for coercive control. The prosecutor agreed. An hour later he called back. Charles had taken the deal. That evening I sat on the porch with a blanket across my knees and watched the street turn gold. The victory did not feel like a brass band. It felt like the exact size of my lungs. It felt like the quiet space in my chest where panic no longer chewed through walls. It felt like a door that had been stuck finally swinging open. Then the letter came from Charles. He wrote in a careful hand that looked like it had been rehearsed. He said he regretted the choices he had made. He said he missed his son. He said he had been drowning in pride and in debt, and in the fear that his life was smaller than he had promised himself it would be. He asked for forgiveness. He asked for a chance. I folded the letter and placed it in a box with the binders and the court orders and the last photograph of the 3 of us from a time before the whisper. I did not light a fire and watch the paper curl. I did not answer. I let the letter sit where it could do no more harm. A quiet witness to a season that had passed. Time pressed forward. 1 year became 2. Ben started middle school with a backpack too large for his bony shoulders and a smile too bright for my heart to hold. He joined a robotics club. He joined the track team. He ran like relief across grass. On a cool autumn afternoon, he stood on a small stage to accept a scholarship award from a community foundation. The stage lights made his hair look like a halo. He thanked his teachers and his neighbors and then, with the brave calm of a boy who had already met truth and shaken its hand, He thanked his mother for teaching him that voices matter even when they are small. I clapped until my palms stung and the room blurred. Work changed too. I left the firm that had trained me to grind and to bill and to ignore the thunder in my ribs. I started a small practice with Cheryl, focused on helping women and men who were trapped in financial fog drawn by someone they had once loved. We taught workshops at churches and libraries about power of attorney abuse, and about how to build a binder before you ever think you need one. We built a network of volunteers who knew how to sit with a stranger in a bank lobby without judgment. We learned that courage grows when it is shared in small rooms with coffee and forms. On the second anniversary of the day the judge made the order permanent, I visited the small garden behind the courthouse. There is a bench there under a maple tree. A brass plaque reads, "Justice is a process, not a single moment." I sat on that bench and listened to the leaves move like a low tide. I thought of the first night at the safe house when the bank camera showed Charles at the counter, confident and sure that the world would bend. I thought of the siren washing the porch with color. I thought of two officers who were tired but gentle. I thought of the detective who returned calls after midnight and of a principal who poured water into a paper cup while my hands shook. I thought of a volunteer who recognized a face and did not look away. I thought of a boy who whispered, and I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. There was one more turn, one last twist that came not as a threat but as a choice. It arrived in a plain envelope stamped with the government seal. The Program for Restorative Dialogue had accepted our case. It was voluntary. It was not about forgiveness. It was about clarity and responsibility. If I agreed, I could sit in a room with a trained facilitator and allow Charles to speak about the harm he had caused and about the reasons he had told himself to explain it. I could speak about the harm I carried. There would be no bargaining. There would be no exchange. Only acknowledgement. I held the letter a long time. I called Philip. I called Cheryl. I called my therapist, a woman with kind eyes who had taught me how to breathe through grief without drowning. Then I called the program and said yes. The room was plain. The chairs were simple. The facilitator began with the rules. No arguing, no interruptions, no blame disguised as self-pity. Only statements of responsibility and impact. Charles looked older. His hair had thinned. The pride had drained from his posture. He spoke first. He said he had let fear turn into entitlement and entitlement turn into action. He said he had chosen to see me as a problem to solve instead of as a person to love. He said he had taught himself to think that money could fill a hollow place and that control was a proof of worth. He said he had hurt our son. He said he took full responsibility. I listened. When it was my turn, I spoke in the same steady tone I had learned in court. I said that what he had done had almost erased the floor beneath our life. I said that my sleep had been stolen. I said that I had learned to open mail with a braced hand. I said that our son had learned too early that love needs laws. I said I was building a life that did not center his choices. I said that the only gift I would give here was clarity. He nodded and cried with quiet shoulders. I did not cry. My well had its own schedule and its own limits. We left without a handshake. We left without a promise. We left with a simple truth set on the table like a stone. It was enough. Years added themselves to our calendar. Ben turned 16 and drove a used sedan with both hands on the wheel. He saved for college in a jar on his dresser and in an account we checked together twice a month. He still hummed when he did homework. He still watered whatever plant the kitchen window could hold. He laughed more. He asked bigger questions. He forgave himself faster when he stumbled. He learned to cook his favorite stew. On a quiet evening he asked if he could invite his father to a supervised game at the park. I looked at him for a long moment and saw not the boy who whispered but the young man who would soon choose his own roads. I said yes. He nodded and thanked me. Later he texted from the field. It is peaceful. We are talking about soccer. I am okay. I typed back 3 words. I am proud. When the tomatoes blushed red that summer, we made a small ceremony of harvest. We filled a bowl and set it on the table with salt and olive oil and bread we tore with our fingers. My parents came by and told stories about fields and festivals, and the way home used to smell when supper simmered on the stove. Friends brought laughter and songs and a cheap guitar that made everything feel like a porch, even when we were indoors. The house was not large, but it held. On the anniversary of the whisper, Ben and I walked to the river and stood on the footbridge where the water talks to stone. He asked if I remembered the exact sound of his voice. I said yes. He smiled without looking at me. I do too, he said. Then he told me something that made my throat ache in the best way. He said the whisper had not been courage to him then. It had been fear and love mixed together. Courage had come later when he saw that telling the truth did not break our life. It built it. We walked back as the sky went gold and then blue and then velvet. Porch lights clicked on. A dog barked twice and then stopped. Somewhere a radio played an old song that knew every corner of my memory. At home I wrote the end of our story and understood that endings are never really ends. They are handrails. They are rest stops on a long road where we pass water between us and point out the light. If this journey found you at a kitchen table or on a bus or in a small room where the world feels loud, know this. Your voice counts even when it shakes. Paper can be a shield when patience holds it steady. Help stands in ordinary places, in a school office, in a bank lobby, in a neighbor who remembers a face. Justice walks with a slow step, but it keeps walking. Love is not a signature. Love is the daily choice to keep each other safe. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me which part of this story found you. If it gave you strength, share it with someone who might need a quiet lighthouse. Subscribe for more true life tales of dignity and grit. We are still here. We are still building. We are still moving toward daylight. The morning after the ruling, the house felt different. The air did not carry the weight of waiting for something terrible to happen. Ben ate his cereal without glancing at the front door. I brewed coffee and let it go cold as sunlight crossed the kitchen tile like a slow blessing. Freedom was not loud. It arrived as breath, steady and unremarkable, and I learned to keep it. Within a week the calls slowed, then stopped. Charles obeyed the restraining order once he realized the paper had teeth. Monique tried once more with a long email about misunderstandings and forgiveness. I archived it without reading the last paragraph. I did not need another theater of excuses. I needed quiet routines where my son could find the floor under his feet again. There were consequences. People talk. In church pews and parking lots, in text threads and whispered lunches, those who had praised our family portrait found new angles for the frame. Some said I had overreacted. Some said a wife should keep her home together no matter what. A few said they always suspected Charles had a wandering eye. None of it mattered beside the fact that my child had told the truth and I had believed him. That was my creed now. Believe the child. Protect the child. Build a life that rewards honesty rather than punishes it. Rosalind invited me to speak with a detective for the formal record. The conference room smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. I laid out the timeline with the patience of someone who knows every step must be mapped. The power of attorney at my bedside. The bank attempt caught on camera. The recorded call where control pretended to be care. I did not sharpen my voice. I did not soften it. I let the facts walk themselves to the table and sit down. When the detective closed his notebook, he said there was a clean line from intent to action. He thanked me for being methodical. I thanked him for listening like a human being. At night the house still remembered fear. Pipes knocked and I sat up. An engine idled outside and my heart went to the window before my feet did. Ben started waking around too, drifting to the hallway with a blanket on his shoulder, unsure if he was allowed to enter my room. Every time I lifted the covers and every time he slid beneath them, small and warm and brave. We began a practice. 3 breaths in and 3 out. Name a safe thing you can see. Name a safe sound you can hear. Name a safe person you can call. The game gave us a little raft on the wide water of midnight. Money had to be addressed. I sold the old house where the walls were crowded with old arguments. I bought a smaller place that faced the morning. I asked Dennis to sit with me and design a plan that could not be moved by charm or panic. The accounts were split like rooms in a floor plan with locks. Emergency fund first. College fund second. Business seed fund third. A small envelope of ridiculous money for joy. I wrote it in my notebook. We are not only surviving, we are learning how to prosper without permission from anyone who does not love us. In the first month after the hearing, I received 5 messages from women I knew and 3 from women I did not. They were careful at first and then they were not. Can you tell me what to look for? How did you know it was not in your head? Where do I begin? I could not fix their lives. I could not arrest their husbands, but I could offer a template for endurance. Document everything. Own your narrative. Create silent exits before you need them. And above all, do not confront until you have protection and proof. I started a small circle in the community center on Thursday nights. I called it Quiet Ledger. The name made me smile because numbers had nearly been my undoing. The circle grew. We drank tea from paper cups and talked about passwords and mortgages, and the way laughter can disguise contempt. We practiced saying no like it was a full sentence and not the beginning of an apology. We set rules. Privacy first. Safety first. No shaming. If a woman left with only one sentence to hold, it was this: your voice does not need a witness to be real. Ben changed too. He stood taller even though his shoes were the same size. He asked questions about fairness at school. He defended a friend on the playground and came home with grass on his knees and a quiet pride in his eyes. I made a promise to him that I wrote on a note card and taped inside the pantry where only we would see it. You told the truth and I believed you. That is how this family works. Months later, I was invited to a neighborhood dinner. I almost declined. It felt easier to stay in the safe geometry of our new routines. But healing required some return to public life. I went. The room buzzed with ordinary conversation. Vacations. Promotions. Recipes that will fix a bad day. When someone asked how I had been, I said the line I had practiced. We have been rebuilding. It is slow and good. I did not owe them a tour of the ruins. The last loose thread was the old church. I sat down with the pastor and explained that I would not be returning to the choir. I loved the hymns, but I could not sit where people weighed my story like produce. The pastor looked sad. He apologized for not calling sooner. He said institutions move slower than harm. I said I understood. I wished him well. I walked out under the same steeple and felt the clear sky like a release. On a Saturday when spring had finished arguing with winter, Ben and I planted a small garden. Tomatoes for summer. Basil for Sunday pasta. Marigolds to keep the bad insects away, and to remind us that color can be a form of armor. He pressed seeds into soil with fierce concentration. I wrote the date on a wooden marker. It felt like signing a treaty with the future. When the first tomato reddened on the vine, I took a picture but did not post it anywhere. Not everything needed an audience. Some victories belonged to the kitchen table and the 2 chairs beside it. I sliced the tomato and sprinkled salt. Ben declared it the best thing he had ever tasted. I laughed and said the truth. Tastes like work that was worth it. By the end of that year, the house creaked less at night. The garden kept its promises. The Quiet Ledger Circle found a second room because we had to keep pulling in more chairs. I did not forget what happened, but I learned to look at it without shattering. The past became a story that taught, not a trap that closed. When fear visited, I let it come in and then I let it leave. It did not know the new routes I had drawn inside my life. Year 1 became year 2 with the calm rhythm of a metronome. I kept the consulting work lean and the mission clear. I helped women read the fine print of their own lives. We reviewed deeds and trusts. We set up emergency files with copies of everything that mattered. Birth certificates, titles, insurance, a list of phone numbers that rang to real people who would answer after midnight. We practiced what to say to a bank teller and how to ask for a branch manager without sounding afraid. Knowledge turned into posture and posture turned into peace. Ben grew into a boy who could make a room brighter by walking into it. He discovered chess and the piano. He learned how to boil pasta and how to look someone in the eye when they apologized without changing. On his 10th birthday, he asked for a notebook rather than a party. He wrote a story about a lighthouse that never slept. I kept that page in my desk like a small lamp for the days when storms looked familiar. The circle kept expanding. Myrtle came with a binder labeled important and a courage that shook her hands. Claire arrived with silence before she learned how to fill it. Sydney showed us the budget she kept hidden in a cookbook. We applauded not because the numbers were perfect but because secrecy had ended. The night Sydney said, "I am not scared of the mailbox anymore," we brought cupcakes. The frosting was too sweet and the moment was exactly right. Some months arrived with soft surprises. A grant from a local foundation that believed in prevention rather than repair. A free room at the library on Tuesday afternoons where I taught a class called Paper and Power. Young women came from the community college. Older women came with reading glasses and decades of experience in everything except legal language. We translated clauses into plain speech. We translated plain speech into action. One woman walked in afraid to open her own mail. She walked out with a plan and a calendar alert. There were setbacks. The past is a patient creature. Charles tried twice to nudge at the edges of orders that had not expired. Once with a letter that employed regret as decoration for demand. Once with a request to meet in a public place because it would be good for Ben to see his father trying. I sent both to Dennis. I did not answer. I learned that silence can be a boundary when it is backed by law, and by the knowledge that nothing he writes can rearrange the truth. Monique vanished in the way people do when the stage lights go down. I heard she moved to another city. I heard she told a new circle she used to know a man who could make anyone believe him. I wished her a gentle lesson and a different script. She had been cruel. She had also been used. Two things can be true at once and neither has to be invited back. In the third year something unexpected arrived. An invitation printed on thick paper from a community council that hosted an annual forum on safety and dignity. They asked me to speak. I stood at the kitchen counter with the card in my hand and felt the old tremor behind my ribs. Public stories make private things louder. But then I pictured the faces in our circle. I pictured young women who do not yet know the names of the traps laid at their feet. I wrote back with one sentence. I will come and I will tell the truth. The forum filled a school auditorium with folding chairs, and the kind of light that makes everyone look human. I wore a simple navy dress and the necklace Ben made from little stones he found at the creek. Rosalind sat in the front row with a smile that said continue. Dennis leaned against the wall with a pen in his pocket in case someone needed a card cut cleanly in half. I spoke for 20 minutes. I did not rehearse a wound. I offered a map. When I finished, a woman in her 60s took the microphone and said she had waited 40 years to hear someone say that trusting is not a flaw. Another asked what to do if the bank manager is a friend of her husband. A young man stood and thanked me for explaining how to listen to a child even when the adult story sounds more convenient. The applause felt like rain on a roof you built yourself. After the forum I walked alone to my car. The night smelled like cut grass and a storm that had chosen another town. A man stepped from the shadow of a tree and my body went tight before my mind found his face. It was Charles. Older at the edges. Less certain in the eyes. He lifted both hands with empty palms. He said my name as if he had borrowed it. I told him to stay where he was and speak from there. He nodded. He said he had come because he heard I was speaking and he wanted to see for himself. He said he was sober now and working at a warehouse that pays on Fridays and never late. He said he had learned that regret is not a currency anyone accepts. He asked if I would consider a letter to Ben in a supervised setting that did not require me to be present. I did not answer right away. I looked past him at the lit windows of the auditorium where people were stacking chairs and laughing softly because the work had felt worth doing. I thought about the boy who had whispered the truth in a dark room, and the woman who had believed him because love requires courage twice. I told Charles to write the letter and to send it to Dennis. If Dennis said it was safe and decent, I would place it in Ben's hands without commentary. If not, the envelope would find a shredder and a clean bin. Charles nodded and thanked me for the rule. He did not ask for more than I offered. He did not step closer. He left without turning for a second look. I sat in my car and waited for my heartbeat to return to an ordinary tempo. I did not cry. I did not celebrate. I adjusted the mirror and drove home by a route with good streetlights. Ben read the letter 2 weeks later. It was short and plain and did not barter. It said, I am sorry for the weight I put on your small shoulders. It said, I am learning how to be a person who does not hide inside a smile. It said, I will not ask for anything. I will only say you deserved better and I am trying to deserve the memory of you. Ben folded the page and put it back in the envelope. He said he wanted to keep it, not to forgive, but to mark a corner of his history with clarity. Summer came, and with it a new tomato season. The garden did what it always does. It taught patience and rewarded attention. The circle did what it always does. It turned fear into information and information into small victories that, piled together, looked like a life. I learned to notice quiet joy and to treat it as news. A night without the doorbell. A month without a legal envelope. A morning when Ben laughed before breakfast and the sound carried through the open window like a promise kept. I used to think survival was the goal. Now I understood that survival was the first step and belonging was the prize. Belonging to myself. Belonging to a community that believed in receipts and mercy in equal measure. Belonging to a future where my son would tell his own story and not feel he had to whisper. In the quiet years I did not forget the storm. I simply refused to live under its forecast. 5 years became 10 with a grace I did not expect. Ben turned 17 and then 18, taller than me and kind in the ways that matter. He kept the lighthouse story and turned it into an essay about steady light in rough water. It won a scholarship from a community group led by elders who said the world needs patient beams more than dramatic flares. He shook their hands the way his grandfather taught him. Firm. Warm. Honest. Quiet Ledger became a non-profit with a small office above a bakery that opened at 6 and filled the hallway with sweet air. We hung a corkboard that held thank you notes and court dates and flyers for legal clinics. We kept a kettle always ready. Women arrived whispering and left speaking in their regular voices. We did not save anyone. We walked beside them while they saved themselves. Our rules did not change. Document everything. Ask for help before panic. Practice the sentence no without apology. I wrote a guidebook with Dennis and Rosalind. We called it Start Here because the hardest part is often the first step. The chapters were simple. How to read a power of attorney. How to freeze a credit line. How to open a private mailbox. How to write a safety plan that includes pets and neighbors. We put copies in libraries and churches and barbershops. Elders nodded over the pages and said I wish we had this long ago. Young people took photos on their phones and said I will share this with my cousin. On a spring afternoon a radio host invited me on air. Her voice held the calm of someone who has shepherded many stories. We talked about the difference between privacy and secrecy. We talked about how love is not a waiver of your rights. Callers told their truths. A grandfather said he had given too much power to a smooth talker and did not know how to take it back. A teenager said her mother hides cash in a flour tin because a boyfriend thinks money is his. We gave them steps. We gave them numbers. We gave them permission to ask for witnesses who are not blind. At home life had its small dramas and plain joys. Ben learned to fix a leaky faucet. I learned to stop keeping a suitcase in the closet just in case. We cooked on Sundays. Pasta with basil from a new garden and bread from the bakery downstairs. We kept our ritual of 3 breaths on hard nights because hard nights still exist. We added a 4th breath for gratitude even when gratitude feels like work. It made room in the chest. The past did not vanish. Took its proper size. Some anniversaries were sharp. The day of the bank footage. The day of the hearing. The day I decided to sell the old house. On those dates I let myself remember and then I took a walk. Memory is not a place to live. It is a museum you visit with the lights on. One winter Charles wrote again. The letter was brief and clean. He said he had 1,200 days of sobriety. He said he no longer chased shortcuts that turned into traps. He did not ask to see Ben. He asked permission to send a small check each month to a fund for a cause of our choice as a living amends. I read it twice. I sent it to Dennis. He said it met the standard we set. I chose the foundation that pays for document fees and bus passes for women starting over. The checks arrived on time. I did not write back. Accountability can be quiet. Ben chose a public university 2 hours away. Close enough for home soup. Far enough to grow his own roots. Move-in day was warm and chaotic. Dorm elevators. Milk crates. The particular hope that hums around new places. I cried in the car on the way back and did not try to hide it. The tears tasted like salt and future. At home I washed the extra set of sheets and then I sat in the living room and listened to the refrigerator hum. The house was not empty. It was full of the work we had done. I kept one chair open in my office for walk-in souls who came with only a name and a question. One afternoon a woman stepped in with a folder clasped to her chest the way people carry newborns. She looked at the corkboard and then at me. She said her name was Velma and her grandson had told her there was a place where whispers became plans. She opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a marriage certificate and a stack of bank statements and a page from a notebook that read "Believe yourself even when he says you are wrong." We began the work. It was familiar and sacred, simple and brave. On a bright Saturday the city held a festival by the river. Music. Food trucks. Kids with painted faces. The mayor gave a short speech about citizens who make things safer without asking for applause. He called out organizations by name. When he said quiet ledger, the circle behind me cheered, and handed me a paper plate with grilled corn and a ribbon someone had found at a craft table. I accepted both because refusing joy does not make you serious. It only makes you hungry for what you have already earned. That evening I walked the river path alone. The water kept its usual pace. Ducks argued about something that did not matter. A couple laughed and I did not flinch. Someone jogged past and I did not check the shadows twice. Healing is not dramatic. It is the accumulation of unremarkable moments where fear does not get to be the narrator. I stopped at the footbridge and looked at the city that had been cruel and kind to me, and I chose to stay in the part that fed me. Ben called from campus. He told me his roommate snores and his philosophy professor speaks in paragraphs that roll like stones. He told me he joined a mentorship program for kids who need help with reading. I told him I loved him, and then I said the sentence that became our creed. You told the truth and I believed you. He said I know and I always will. Later that night I sat at my desk and wrote a small letter to my younger self. I wrote that trust is not a flaw. I wrote that you will not always be afraid of the driveway at dusk. I wrote that a child will hand you a sentence that feels like a match, and you will choose to light a lamp instead of a fire. I folded the letter and placed it next to the lighthouse notebook. 2 small anchors. 2 steady lights. The years teach what the days cannot. Love without control exists. Safety can be built. Joy can be ordinary. And when the doorbell rings at dinner, it does not have to be a storm. Sometimes it is a neighbor with extra collard greens and a story about grandkids. Sometimes it is no one at all and the pasta water just boils. Part 9. Direct address and invitation. Words. 612. If you are listening at a kitchen table with a tired heart, this part is for you. Maybe your story sounds different. Maybe the betrayal is not money but a promise that kept breaking until it was only noise. Maybe the person who warned you was a child or a neighbor or the voice inside you that refuses to be quiet any longer. I am not here to tell you what to do. I am here to tell you that you are not crazy and you are not alone. Start with one step. Gather your papers. Birth certificates. Social security cards. Bank statements. Insurance policies. Put copies in a safe place that is not where he looks first. Open a small notebook. Write dates. Write what was said. Facts are your friends when fear tries to make a fog. Call someone who will speak to you like you are real. A lawyer. A counselor. A pastor who understands dignity. A friend who will drive you to the bank without asking for a show. If you have a child who whispers a hard truth to you, believe them. Wrap your arms around them and say, I hear you and I will keep you safe. Then keep that promise with ordinary actions. Routines. Bedtime breaths. Doors that lock. Teachers who know the right name to call in a pinch. If you are an elder listening with a lifetime of stories in your bones, your wisdom is welcome here. We need your voice when shame tries to make us small. Tell us how you kept going when the lane was rough. Teach us how to stand up in public without losing our softness in private. Sit with us in church basements and library rooms and barber chairs, and remind us that community is more than a word. It is a practice. If you are a man who wants to be different from the man in this story, thank you for being here. You are not our savior. You are our neighbor. Learn the laws. Watch your friends. Step in when jokes try to hide harm. Raise boys who know that power is not proof of worth and that love without respect is not love at all. If you work at a bank or a courthouse or a clinic, you stand at gates that can open or close. Train your staff to listen. Post a sign that explains how to revoke a power of attorney. Keep a chair behind the counter for someone who needs to sit while making a hard call. Bring humanity to the spaces where forms can feel like walls. And to the one who is planning a quiet exit, you do not have to do it perfectly. You only have to do it safely. A suitcase hidden in the trunk of a friend. A burner phone with numbers written on paper. A plan that includes pets and medications and a little cash in a shoe. Courage is not loud. Courage is careful. I built a life from pieces I once thought were shattered beyond repair. I did not do it alone. The list of helpers is long. A son who told the truth. A lawyer who brought his pen like a lantern. A detective who treated me like a person and not a case number. Women who showed up on Thursday nights ready to trade fear for knowledge. A city that learned to say our names with respect. If this story met you at the right time, let me know where you are listening from. Tell me one small step you will take this week. Drop a line in the comments so another person can see it and think I can do that too. If you want more stories with maps and not just storms, subscribe and stay close. We will keep walking together. We will keep the light steady. We will keep choosing safety and joy, not because it is easy but because it is ours.